What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to break down the 2024 Men's Olympic Golf Competition with Spencer Aguiar, whom you can find on Twitter or X at TOpSports. You can find me at Roberto A213. We are very excited for the Olympics this week. 60-player field at Le Golf National, which hosted the Ryder Cup in 2018 and hosts the Open de France, the French Open, on the DP World Tour annually. So people who follow the DP World Tour will be pretty familiar with it. Spencer has his model ready. Excited to jump into that. Before then, Spencer, what is your best bet for the Olympics men's competition in golf this week?
I have a lot of head-to-heads this week, Roberto. That's not a common answer that I've given on this show quite frequently, but my best bet is going to go into that sector of the market. The number's on the move a little bit. It should still be value by the time that this ends up airing, but Abraham Answer, minus 105 over Carlos Ortiz. You can play that probably up to another 15 points up from there.
All right, so Spencer is playing a matchup between the two Mexicans in the field. For my best bet, I'm going to go a little bit more aggressive with Wyndham Clark at 8-1 for a top 5 finish. That is with ties paid in full. If you don't want to play the ties paid in full, it's also available at 10-1 without ties. So consider that bet. But before I jump into why I'm betting it, Spencer, why are you playing Answer over Ortiz in this Mexican matchup?
So I talk a lot on this show about market over corrections. That can be on either side of the aisle when we either look at a golfer getting boosted up for his recent quality form, or the reverse of that answer where someone is seeing too large of a decrease in the eyes of the public. It felt like to me here, the market presented a little of that when diving into Ortiz, just because if you look at what Ortiz has done recently, he's beaten Answer in 3 of their last 4 live events. That includes an outright victory against the field in Houston. So public sentiment wise, a lot of the chips early in the week got pushed onto the Ortiz side and away from Answer. I've been talking recently, whether it's my bet or other wagers in the space that are coming in, it seems like numbers are starting to flip in that territory there. And I get form matters in golf, but the more significant answer for me is always going to be how you fit a property. At the core of this bet, I don't even necessarily have arguments that Ortiz has a higher ceiling. We've seen that with him all season. There is this boomer bust nature that always comes into play. I know we lose the miscut equity that I would love to have here. My model would like to see even more if there was a 36-hole cut that came into play. But matchups are all about taking advantage of a baseline projection at the setup. And that's something that heavily pushed in the favor of Answer because of his consistency. You look at what they've done this year, when we date it back a little bit further, Answer's still beaten Ortiz in 8 of their 12 starts when they have been pitted against one another in a tournament. He outperformed him last week in the UK. It's another reason why even the recent form Answer towards Ortiz doesn't necessarily carry the weight that you would expect it to. And then you look at a profile here where you get these water-bound tests, accuracy, proximity numbers. That all pushes in the direction of what Abraham Answer presents at the very crux of what we're looking for here. I said this on the Action Network show a couple weeks ago when I talked about the Olympics. I've talked about it in articles. This is a venue, because of all the water that comes into play, that is one of those prototypical Florida, non-Florida courses here. Like, you're going to have all the French design that comes into play here. And there's more than just that, but like TPC Sawgrass, there's different places with a lot of water. Go and look at the results from those two golfers in most of those situations, and you're going to see miscut versus miscut from Ortiz, and you're going to see Answer, who plods his way around, and you're going to hear the word plod a lot here about I'm looking for plodders on this course, but he plods his way around the course, and there's a lot of 15th, 25th, 30th. There's a consistent nature with Answer here where if you told me one of these golfers is going to win this event and we get here on Sunday and you say one of these guys came in first or second place, I'm going to probably tell you, Roberto, I don't know how great I feel about this wager right now. But if you were to tell me that we get a 17th versus 47th, that's the recipe for how Abraham Answer wins. So thought minus 105 was just far too cheap of a price.
I'm intrigued to hear the rest of your matchups because there are matchup bets out there. There were a few that I liked, but they felt pretty square, and I don't want to lay minus 130, minus 140 juice, and I feel like I was walking into a trap. So I'm going to go against the grain. I want to back plotters on this golf course for safety, but I'm going with somebody who's very much not a plotter in Wyndham Clark here for a top 5. We've talked about Wyndham Clark on the show. Spencer, you hit him at, I believe, Wells Fargo last year. We both were on him at the US Open and Pebble Beach this year. And Pebble Beach, not a course that you think about bombers winning at. And you brought up TPC Sawgrass and some of the other Florida courses. TPC Sawgrass is where Wyndham Clark got this horrible horseshoe lip out that would have put him into a playoff with Scotty Scheffler had he made the putt. And he has such a high upside potential with his putter, his driver, and with his irons. His irons haven't been very consistent recently, but he has shown some upside somewhat recently when at the Travelers he gained almost 5 shots for the tournament with his irons. His putter has been hot on the last 3 weeks that he's played, 2 of them being across the pond at the Scottish Open and the Open Championship. So at the Scottish Open, he was phenomenal with the putter. And just want to double check for a second exactly where he was with putting there. I want to say he led the event, and he was 3rd in the event behind Romain Langasque and Connor Syme. But he's got a high upside with the putter. I wasn't sure if that would translate across the pond. The recent results at the Scottish Open and the Open have shown that it does. He can bomb the ball, and I think that gives him upside. I wouldn't necessarily want to bet him in safety markets this week. I was actually looking at fading him in a matchup potentially against Sepp Straka, but I like the 8-1 price. And when you look at some of the other golfers in this range who are, or other golfers in the top 5 market who have shorter prices than him, some of them include Matthew Pavone, Ben An, Thomas Dietrich, Jason Day, Minwoo Lee, Sepp Straka, Matt Fitzpatrick, Corey Connors. He's got a way higher upside than any of those guys. I don't think that I want to bet him in a matchup against those golfers because a lot of them are in better form, but he has the keys to get to win. And I don't hate him to win this week. I don't think he will, but I like the upside nonetheless for Wyndham Clark. And I think that it's just another case of him being disrespected by the books. And I'll scoop it up, even though I think it's unlikely to hit, but I think it's better than the 8-1 odds would imply.
I'll give you my top 3 here. This would be leverage upside options. That's kind of a DFS answer there, but it also constitutes a little bit of what their price tag is in the outright market. And I don't necessarily, I have a ticket on one of them. We can talk about it later. It doesn't necessarily constitute only winning this event, but it's looking for upside with these answers. And that's what a top 5 wager does. The 3 names that push more in that area of I don't even want to call it boom or bust, but their ceiling potential is better than the price. Matthew Fitzpatrick, which is one of the names you mentioned. I like Fitzpatrick this week as leverage in some of these spots. Wyndham Clark, Viktor Hovland. Those are the 3 names for me. And, those are 2 major championship winners and a golfer in Hovland that at his very best was a real threat to the number 1 crown for, some time there. So that's kind of what you're looking for. This is an event that you and I were talking off air. We knew we would circle back to this at some point, but it's probably going to be won by one of these elite players. And whether that's a 16-1 or less golfer because it's the favorite, or it's a name like Fitzpatrick, Hovland, Wyndham, who can pull some magic here and win at a price that's a little bit inflated compared to the rest of those names. It is hard for me, and you'll hear my card. I have 2 long shots here. Like I didn't not go that direction, but I tend to agree with you that like if you're shooting for upside, those are probably the 3 names I'm doing it with.
Hovland is one of the other golfers I'm most intrigued with this week, but we'll get into him in a moment. First, Spencer, How are you modeling Le Golf National, the Albatross course, this week?
I'm going to flip this question back to you, Roberto, and I've posed this multiple times. It's a very unique tournament because you always get this straightforward blueprint of what is being asked week in and week out. Whether there's a cut or there's no cut, you play the opening 2 rounds. You either make the weekend if there's a cut, or you play the weekend because there's not a cut, like in this particular circumstance. And then you get more or less aggressive from there when you add in the final few factors. There are certain players that are going to want a better payday. There are certain golfers that just play to win. That is not what this is here. This is a highly volatile course. Tons of water that comes into play. You have to come first, second, or third. Anything that is not one of those 3 marks, you have lost. And I guess where I want to phrase the question to you, Roberto, is we don't have enough data. We don't have really any data for this particular course of what happens in this spot. We can see it play as the French Open. We can talk about it at the Ryder Cup. Those are still going to be different examples for all the obvious reasons. How do you weigh in a model such a volatile course that we're getting here with the need to have to be aggressive at a certain portion of the contest if you find yourself a little bit behind the 8 ball?
I wanted to bet players not to medal at a certain level of this golf tournament. Probably live. I don't know if that'll be an opportunity that actually arises, but I would love to bet below position 3.5 or below 4.5 or 5, because you're going to make a double bogey. So there's a lot of water on the golf course, and you're going to take some risks at the end of the tournament to try and get a top 3 place. There's no money incentives. There's no better result for being 4th place versus 40th versus 60th this week. So if you're in contention to get that bronze medal, I think that it is important to consider that and the ramifications, and that guys don't care about making a double bogey versus a par if they need a birdie. So I would love to live bet on catastrophes for golfers coming down the stretch. There'll also be other golfers who are feeling the pressure of maybe getting a medal of some kind. I also wanted to potentially bet a Korean to medal because they have the military service requirement, but the Koreans in the field, I believe, are already out of the military requirement. So I am very intrigued to look at that aspect of it. As far as modeling it, that's why I don't have many bets today, because I don't have a high level of certainty of the proximity ranges that are going to be needed. And I haven't watched this tournament. It's in late September, which is prime football season for me. So I'm not going to pretend like I've ever watched the French Open. I have not. I saw the Ryder Cup. I do not have any relevant takeaways from that tournament other than you got to hit the fairways. So I am putting a premium on hitting fairways. The graduated rough, which is cut longer and longer the farther away you are from the fairway, is important. But at the end of the day, it's still rough. It's not going to be unplayable. The water aspect is interesting. I think modeling it like PGA National, TPC Sawgrass, those are interesting to a certain degree, at least off the tee. Around the green, I'm not super familiar with this course. So if I end up playing outrights, I don't have any on my card yet. I'm going to be playing them between 2 and 4 units, to win 2 and 4 units, depending on whom I bet on. But there's a lot more uncertainty than I like, which is why I haven't bet any matchups yet. I'm very intrigued to hear how you are betting those, and if there are any matchups I haven't seen that I can potentially add as an in-pod play. But yeah, a lot more uncertainty than I'm comfortable with this week. And sometimes I might bet some things, but I'm not going to be recommending them to people if I don't feel like I have a solid edge. So I'm cool with punting on some tournaments sometimes. And we found that in this podcast history, I've had some weeks where I didn't love the board, or I like one bet and I don't really like any of the other ones. For example, the Valspar last year didn't have anybody shorter than like 35-1. We ended up hitting on Taylor Moore at 70. We both were on that one. And then a couple weeks ago at Barracuda, bet 2 guys, really felt strongly about Nick Dunlap, like JJ Spawn too, but bet Dunlap to win a lot more than Spawn, and it worked out. So I'm not going to force anything. And I think that bankroll management is going to be really key, especially because I think one of those handful of guys at 15-1 or shorter is going to win this week. I think the only other couple guys beyond that range that intrigue me at all are Hovland and Clark. Already have the Clark bet at in the top 5 market at 8-1 with ties. So I am approaching it conservatively. I like to bet the top 40s, the placement positions where guys just have to make the cut essentially. And those are not markets really available this week. So there's a little bit of uncertainty just based on the course. And then also the lack of depth in the field and the lack of the markets that I like to bet that I think are profitable in the long term gives me some frustration, but I'm not going to force it. And I'm going to try to play conservatively and be ready for the Wyndham next week. How did you model the Golf National this week?
Well, first of all, just to touch on what you said very quickly, Roberto, value is always the name of the game. Like, there's a lot of shows out there that will release content even if there's not value. That is not what we do here. We want an edge, and if there's not an edge, we are going to be very forthcoming about it. And you and I have a little bit of a differing take on this, where I actually found value in this tournament, and that's what makes this a fun conversation. I thought what you talked about with betting some of those like not metal markets or not markets in general, that's been something that has, maybe at a broader scale of what we're even talking about here, has made a lot of waves in the space. There are prominent bettors out there that have taken the players to not win majors, and a lot has been made of that. Now, personally, I think it's very savvy and very sharp. I know there's a lot of people out there that are nailing these particular people for what they're doing. Like, you're not going to hear that from me. I think this is a very savvy market where you're treating it just in a much more portfolio stock trader sense with it. And that's something that inside of the United States as a whole, as that gets more prevalent and that starts getting built in, I think that's more where we can start talking about it. That's not necessarily something that we can come on these shows and discuss right now. But I think in general, trying to find players to not win a medal is a very intriguing route to take this week. You talked about the time of the year. The last two iterations of this tournament in particular have been a little bit later than we're going to get right now. I know we're going to get a wet course. I don't know what that's going to necessarily play it as, but if you look from a statistical perspective, at least from what I have been able to find, the last two iterations were much more distance heavy than when it was played at a different time of the year. I think we're going to go back to that accuracy answer. I get that the rough, yes, it's going to get worse by how badly that you miss it. But let's not forget, rough is still rough and water is still water. Those misses into water you cannot scramble out of. It's one of the reasons why we have now mentioned Viktor Hovland probably combined 10 times in the first however many minutes of this show is. There are certain players that get a boosted increase in projection in my model because a miss that's an errant miss is going to be waterbound for the entire field. And players that hit a high percentage of GIRs, greens in regulation, are going to be able to see an advantage for me inside of my build. So Viktor Hovland, as we move into the outright market, he was 35-1 yesterday. I've seen him drop more into the 27-1 range now. I went on 2 weeks ago and I was talking about it during the Open Championship when I filmed a show for Action here. He was 22-1. I said he's probably going to drift because he's just missed the cut. But even at 22-1, I thought he was a bettable price. I don't think you're going to get any lower necessarily, or better, I guess I should say. Like 27-1 seems to be the best right now. The market is reacting positively to Hovland for all the reasons that we've talked about. But, I guess the only other thing I would say to this, Roberto, is the other answer that I've heard talked about in this space a lot is that the rough is not what we saw at the Ryder Cup. Well, yes, it would never be that. Like, Ryder Cups are meant to be skewed 100% in the favor of the home country. Europe is going to make this as accuracy driven as possible, and the US is going to blow the doors open. Let's bomb and gouge the hell out of the facility and see how much distance can play here. It's going to land somewhere, in my opinion, in the middle of the last two French Opens and the Ryder Cup, probably closer to the French Open if we're being like honest about it, just because the rough isn't going to necessarily be as penal. But I like this tournament, and the reason why I like this tournament is because the general public, and this is another DFS answer, has taken a very strong viewpoint and a very exact viewpoint of what they think this week. And when my model has differing opinions, those are typically the spots where in matchups and DFS, I can find an advantage because my numbers are spitting out different results compared to the baseline projections that you're seeing elsewhere. So That's why I ended up with more matchups. The outright board may have some of those flaws that you talked about. I still think, though, that there's a couple pockets of value here that I thought were worth considering.
Let's jump into our pockets of value, and I'll get it started. I just made an in-pod play. I'm on Viktor Hovland. I love the driving accuracy. I didn't realize how accurate he's been. Each of the last 6 tournaments he's played in, he's been above average driving accuracy of the field. He is very long. We know that. The iron play has not been awesome recently. Worst result of the year second worst result of the year came at the Open Championship in his last start. Again, that was 2 rounds. One of them was super windy, so I'm willing to just kind of throw that out. I do like that the greens here are really big. On the GCSAA sheet, it said average between around 6,500 and over 8,000 feet. So either way, it's going to be big between above average and huge greens, which helps take the flat stick, which helps take short game out of Viktor Hovland's bag and replaces the putter. That's a huge advantage. I know Nick was really bullish on him during the Scottish Open for similar reasons. I think that this is a better course fit because of the even bigger greens, and it's an upside play. Do I think that Viktor Hovland is a safe matchup bet? Not necessarily, but he has the upside. Just remember last year during the FedEx Cup playoffs when he was playing like the best player in the world at the time, winning the BMW Championship and the Tour Championship in consecutive weeks. And we know that he can absolutely pound the golf ball. His shot shape of choice is almost entirely a pull fade. So you eliminate the left miss. When you miss right, it's not going to be too far away. It's not like Wyndham Clark, who's going to be almost hits a slice at times. Hovland's going to be really straight off the tee. If his irons click, he's got a great chance to win this tournament. As good of a chance as anybody not named Schauffele and Scheffler, I believe. So at the price, 25, 27 to 1 in that range, I really like it. I think I'd bet him down to 20 to 1. I hadn't bet it because I just was afraid of leaving room open for Scotty Scheffler. I don't necessarily want to do that. I do think that Scheffler sets up really well for this course. Obviously, he won at TPC Sawgrass as the only player to win back-to-back Players' Championships. I still think he's the player to beat by a mile, given the premium on driving accuracy and the fact that the water helps him because he knows I can't miss left. I'm not going to miss left. I can't miss right. I'm not going to miss right. He's going to eliminate the miss that is too penal. And he noted at the US Open that he didn't like visually how Pinehurst number 2 looked because of the wiregrass and the native areas where there wasn't a better miss because it's super random. Unless there was an area where the wiregrass was thicker than others. So I like Scotty Scheffler this week a lot. I think that he might have to be on your DFS lineup, but we can discuss that later if you like Spencer. But I'm afraid of betting anybody else shorter than 15 to 1 because of the opportunity cost of betting anybody else. I'm going to save room for live betting if the opportunity arises, but otherwise I'm very comfortable with just having Viktor Hovland on my card at this 27 to 1 price because of his immense upside relative to the others in that range. And because there are only 60 golfers, I think 20 of them really don't have a chance this week. So it's really a 40 golfer, 50 golfer field. And there's not a ton of that top talent, and the mid-tier is depleted because there are only 4 Americans in the field. Anybody below number 15 was not able to join the field. So there's a lot of depth of golfers, and for other countries as well, that I would love to see here. I think the OWGR being the way that the Olympics chose the golfers. Like, for example, Bryson DeChambeau's not even in the field. How is the US Open winner not in the Olympics field? That's a huge loss for golf fans and for the Olympic Games themselves and their credibility. I would love to see them come up with a way different way of figuring out the field and also expanding the field past 60 golfers to make it a proper tournament for the world's best to identify the Olympic Games winner. It only happens once every 4 years. Let's get it right. We got time to fix it. Also intrigued about the potential of a team competition one man, one woman on each team. They're looking at that potentially for the 2028 Olympics, which are going to be at Riviera. Will be awesome. But I've rambled on too long, Spencer, for just one pick. Viktor Hovland, 27-1. Love it. Let's go. Thank you for convincing me. I'm on it. Who you got on your card besides Viktor Hovland?
So I took Shubhankar Sharma at 400-1. That number's more in the 300-1 range now. It's a very similar answer for what I talked about with Hovland. So Sharma graded third in my model for expected total driving for similar courses, inside of the top 20 for weighted GIR percentage. And then the similarity with Hovland just comes down to one of the most significant weaknesses from within his game gets at least marginally concealed at the bare minimum, if not massively concealed. You talked about the large greens here. Sharma's around the green game has problems. If I think he's going to hit a bunch of greens in regulation and he's going to hit a bunch of fairways off the tee, to me, this was a golfer, and I've made this argument from the start. Maybe we're pushing this too far of who can actually win, but this is 125, 150-1 sort of golfer that we were getting in the 300 to 400-1 range. The market corrected itself a little bit, at least after the Open Championship. I know that there's a plethora of 200-1 numbers out there, and you can even maybe get shorter depending on what books you're looking at. But I like Sharma at the price. He was one of those long shot names. It's gotten completely carried away in DFS. Like the price tag and the ownership is going to be massive, and that's a decision that you're going to have to make. I don't love low end chalk. I think you run into a lot of problems with those situations. That's a different discussion to be had when I'm talking about just winning a golf tournament and he's 400-1 or 300-1, whatever we want to call it at this moment. I'm fine betting on the upside. It's a very cheap investment. I talked about pockets of opportunity here. Viktor Hovland, as we have talked about, was a pocket of opportunity because look at the range from 20-1 to 25-1, or anybody who's really in that section with him. He was the one name that had a higher end pedigree in my sheet for expected win equity from anybody else. Doesn't mean that a name like Alex Noren or Tommy Fleetwood are not going to win. These are two golfers that have won at this course in the past and historically can find success at a venue like this. I do think at the end of the day, though, unfortunately, whether it ends up being the sports books were correct in skewing the price away from them being bettable, which we have seen quite frequently this year, or just an overpriced commodities to begin with, I would rather bet the upside with Hovland there. Now, where the other pocket of value came into play for me, and this takes a little bit more fiddling around in my model to get to this answer, and I'm fine doing it for a couple core reasons here. Whether you want to say Scotty or Xander or Scotty, whatever order we want to put them in, it's like the pros of Scotty is he's going to be dominant across the board. Can the putter make enough putts? Can the putter be good enough to win the golf tournament? Xander gives you the putter that Scotty doesn't give you and gives you those high-end grades alongside of it. My question that I kept asking myself when I built my model and I was trying to run my math here, is there anybody else in this field who can equal or rival those two? Because what we have seen so frequently this year, and I will be the first one to admit, Xander was number one in my model at the Open Championship. It was a mistake on my end not picking Xander to win. That was value on that board, and that's human error coming into play, unfortunately, of all the times of me betting Xander and saying, I'm not going to listen to the value of it. And that's what you don't want to be doing in these spots. Like, there's a reason why when numbers drift, there's value in those spots. So I was trying to ask myself in this spot, we have seen Scotty win frequently this year. We've seen Xander win. I want somebody with high-end upside at the top of the board if I'm going to go up there. Is there a name that can reach that caliber? And is there any golfer inside of my model that I can get into that territory? So Jon Rahm at 11-1. We know that he just won a live golf tournament. He finally got that monkey off his back. We know at the Open Championship, a top 10 finish for him while being on the wrong end of the weather draw there. Very impressive top 10 finish in that regard. The game is starting to check all the boxes of what I am trying to see here. And at his very best, he was an immaculate, elite total driver on courses like this, whether it was a club down venue or just the ability to find fairways. Inside of my model, he ranks 37th out of 60 players in expected total driving. That is not where you want to be. That is the mark that hurt him in my sheet a little bit. When I backtracked this and pulled it back a year, these live golfers do not have the amount of data, and even the data that we get from live on them, it's very shaky. I know Jon Rahm at his best is one of the 3 best players in the world. We could nitpick the order. We can say Scotty's the best. And if we want to say Xander or Rahm are close or whatever order we want to talk about them there, Rahm was every bit in that class until he got himself over to live, hasn't found any major championship success until the Open Championship. And his numbers started drifting because of that reason. Like at the Open, we were looking at a golfer that was 25-1 to win that event. We are now starting to see the game trend in the positive direction. The total driving that I talked about, if I remove it and backtrack a year or just run the recent data, he jumps inside of the top 5 of my model for expected total driving. That propels him right in that same expectation range with Xander and Scotty. So if, one is 4-1, one is 5-1, 6-1, and one is 11-1, that 11-1 number was the true value for me, where I thought he should have been closer to that 7.5 to 8-1 number. There's a lot of different ways to bet cards. And, on this show, none of us are ever going to have 15 names that are being given. They're going to be low exposure cards in general. And you and I have talked about this even before the show. There are an ample number of ways to get exposure to where I think that cookie cutter approach of to win 7 or 8 units or whatever number that you want to do out there, it's great as just like some black and white answer, and it's a very easy thing to build around. But value at the end of the day and trying to maneuver and traverse through a card and build it in a way where it actually makes sense. It doesn't have to be so black and white with it. And I bet Jon Rahm to win less units than I normally would in this spot. I actually raised it a little bit today from where I even had it, just because as I continue to push these numbers, Rahm is becoming more and more of a value for me. So I only bet him to win 4 units. I bet Hovland to win 7. I bet Sharma to win 8. So we're all over the map here. There's not necessarily some built-in blueprint to this, but I really like Jon Rahm. I have found myself for consecutive weeks now, whether it's Vegas or Xander or Bobby Mack, it's the name that I'm not fitting on my card that I haven't been able to fit in because of the exposure I have. I have 0.6 units essentially of exposure right now. I'm fine with the way this card is built. I have all the matchups to make up for it. I think Rahm is a really intriguing value here if you're trying to find that third name that can win this golf tournament that's outside of Xander and Scotty. And then the other ticket that I punched, I don't know what his win equity truly is in this spot, Roberto. I had value on the number. I'll preface it with that. I bet Victor Perez at 110-1. A little bit of a built-in thing, at least from a lot of these French athletes in general. And I know every person is different, but a lot of these French athletes in general have gotten a minor boost. And I think in particular, inside the head-to-head market is probably better where Perez and Pavon would be, because you're going to get 4 rounds out of these guys to where they're playing in front of their home country. They're going to give their best effort. I was trying to figure out a way, how do I get exposure to those 2 golfers? I always talk about people I want to fade. Well, who are the golfers that I actually want to back in this spot? And I thought the 2 French golfers were really intriguing names to consider. We can talk about that route a little bit later. From an upside market with Perez, he had multiple top 10 grades for me in my sheet. I know the course history is going to leave a little bit to be desired. 2 okay finishes, 2 finishes that are subpar at the end of the day, but I think he has shown enough at this course. I think the skill set recently has shown a lot, and the statistical output at 110-1, that is the sort of name that I'm looking for if somebody's going to shock on this leaderboard. I think Perez, if he is there on Sunday and the home crowd can get behind him, that's one of those spots where he might be able to just get willed across the finish line. So Data really liked him. The numbers had him as a top 15 projected win equity candidate. That is really good for a golfer that was over 100-1 for me. So those are the 4 names I'm going with. Perez is also only to win a little 5 units spread across the board there. But as I said, I tend to like this outright board marginally more than you do at the very bare minimum of that answer.
I think Rahm is a really intriguing answer. You noted that his ceiling is top 3 in the world. I would throw Rory McIlroy into that top tier, but I think that it's a clear top tier with Scheffler, Schauffele, McIlroy, and Rahm. And last year, before or up until the Masters, he was the best player in the world. His putter is better than Scotty Scheffler's, period. He's basically as long as anybody, not named Bryson. The only issue for him is that his misses are longer than anybody, not named Bryson or Rory. His misses can be ugly. He, like Viktor Hovland, plays that peel fade where he starts it up the left side, and after April last year, it started going farther left, and you play that kind of shot because it eliminates the left miss. And he brought that left miss into play, and it's been an issue. The question for him, or for me, about Jon Rahm is if his drives, they don't even need to be in the fairway. As long as they're not horrific misses into the water, if they're misses into the rough, that's totally fine. I like Jon Rahm. He's in great form. You noted that an important point in that he played in the wrong wave at the Open Championship, which was a huge penalty for him, and then gained over 3 shots per round in that tournament, which in a regular PGA Tour event is normally good enough to get you into contention or to win a major championship. You need to get over 4 normally. And last week at the UK, or at Live UK, he was at 3.3 shots per tournament. I know that the individual statistics like strokes gain approach or the approach from certain yardages is not up to the standard on Live Golf. However, the strokes gain total is something that you can look into that I think is more legitimate. And because it's in terms of a PGA Tour tournament, at least on Data Golf in their true stroke gains version. I think that's very significant. He's played 2 events good enough to win a regular PGA Tour event, not an elevated event or major championship. And his accuracy has been above the field average in 4 straight tournaments and 6 of the last 8. Of course, one of those 2 in the last 8 is the one that I bet him in. And he was well below the field average. And I think you were on him too at the PGA Championship. And I still think that wasn't a terrible bet. I think you got to get somebody super long. And Schauffele showed that that was the right play there. We both actually were on Viktor Hovland there as he was too long. And so hopefully we can ride that wave with Hovland this week. I'm very intrigued by Rahm. And now that I have the Hovland on my card, I bet him to win 6 units. I'm not going to be betting very aggressively this week. I'll consider Rahm. Might add him before the tournament starts, but I'd like to save some bullets for in the tournament, which is why I haven't added him or anybody else yet. But I like the upside relative to the price of others in that range. Also, I'll add that you noted the top 4 players in terms of upside. I think that Viktor Hovland, you can make an argument, is right there in the next tier. I'd have him somewhere between 5th and 7th, whether you want Colin Morikawa or Ludwig Åberg right there. I think that those 3 players are solidly in tier 2 in this field as far as upside. So I like that I can get Viktor Hovland on my card at double the price of any of those other guys. And if Rahm is longer than a Schauffele, a Scheffler, and a Rory, I think that's great value. So I like Rahm. I haven't added him yet, but I will be keeping an eye on this and try to do some more digging on Le Golf National and just trying to get more of an edge.
All I was going to say with Rahm, I believe it was in 2019. If you look at that Players' Championship that Rory McIlroy won, I believe Jon Rahm entered the day in the lead. And it was the misses and the bad course management. There was a shot where he found the water. I believe it was on the back 9. That was just one of the... It was not good. Let's just leave it at that. And he ends up imploding on Sunday there. Rory gets across the finish line. He was 4 or 5 over, I believe, at the end of the day there to slip down the leaderboard. You know, that is the Jon Rahm that obviously we don't want. And there's a lot of water where volatility comes into play. But you talked about upside, and I do have a portion of my model that just looks at upside on any generic course that is not going to take a course-specific outlook. Course-specific outlooks will push you in a different direction for it. Of those names, number 1, Scotty Scheffler. Number 2, Xander Schauffele. 3rd is Rahm. 4th is Rory. 5th is Åberg. 6th is Hovland. That's kind of the exact answer of how I have ended up in Rahm and Hovland in this spot. Like, I keep talking about pockets of value. You can kind of see that, well, Rahm becomes a pocket of value. And if I'm that much higher on Hovland in the market, then Hovland naturally becomes a pocket of value there.
Completely in lockstep with you right there. Also, one other thing that I think is important is that there are not a ton of golfers in this field who have experience, at least among the top 20 or 30 golfers who have a ton of experience on this golf course. Rahm played here twice in 2017 and 2018, did not finish outside the top 10. And in the one tournament where they had individual strokes gained data, he gained strokes across the board, including with off the tee where he was one of the best in the field. And then he was well above. So in the 2 times he played here, he was 13% below driving accuracy of the field average and 14% above the field average driving accuracy. So I think he's got a lot of upside. You know what, Spencer? I'm just going to lock it in. Give me Jon Rahm. You've talked me into the 2 guys. I'm taking him. And one thing so I like the course experience. And also I like that I think he's a little bit more streaky than some of the other big time golfers in that he can't have that left miss going. And if he has that locked in, it just gives him a ton of upside. And the rest of his game is really strong. The iron play is something we don't talk enough about with Jon Rahm, specifically long iron play. And if he needs to club down on some of these holes, I trust him to do that. So give me Jon Rahm. Let's ride with the Spaniard and the Norwegian. And I think that the upside just isn't being priced in, especially given the turn of his play recently in the last couple of weeks. And maybe we can capitalize on that wave advantage being a disadvantage for Rahm and him not potentially being priced in where he should be, because if he gets the right wave, that's worth 2 shots or 3 shots, and we have him in contention with Xander Schauffele down the stretch at the Open. I don't think this price is where it is.
That's kind of the mentality behind it. I think you'd be much more in that 7 or 8 to 1 range if you would have gotten a finish that was even not a victory. Put him in 2nd or 3rd place and like in true contention to win.
Haven't punched a ticket yet. I'll do it right now. I'm going to do it to win 5 units. Another player I really like, I'm putting outright bet in on, is Akshay Bhatia. He has been a resident of North Carolina for a while. He's a lefty. He predominantly is a fader of the golf ball, but he can shape shots. Next year, so while the Olympics is at a golf course that I do not have a ton of expertise on, I don't have years of memory bank piled up on this golf course, years of data to pull from as well. There is a golf course at a major championship next year. There are 2, of course, with the Masters at Augusta that we do have data on, and that is at Quail Hollow Club, which normally hosts the Wells Fargo Championship, also has hosted the President's Cup, and next year it is hosting the PGA Championship. I think that Quail Hollow is a very specific golf course that rewards golfers who shape the ball from right to left. Normally, that's a draw for right-handers, but Akshay Bhatia, being a lefty, it's a fade. He's also noted that it's one of his favorite golf courses in the world. He's 22 years old. He has the potential to be an elite player with his irons. The putter has been a massive transformation. Last year, he was 183rd on the PGA Tour in strokes gained putting. This year, he entering the 3M Open was in the top 30 and was 0.8 shots better per round. I think he dropped a little bit because he had a rough putting week this past weekend. He's going to be ready for this tournament. He's got tons of experience on this golf course. He should be comfortable playing a pseudo home game for him. At 150 to 1, I love the value on a golfer who still hasn't reached his peak. Do I have concerns that it's the Sahith Theegala effect of next year or what I had this year, where I bet him at 100 to 1 to win the Masters, and then he's 40 to 1, and then he doesn't really contend? Yes, I'm concerned. And I don't hate betting Rory or Xander there, but I wouldn't want to bet it now at these prices. And because of the time value of money, lock up those bets for such a long period of time. Those are going to be the guys to beat. I also think it's really interesting that Scottie Scheffler has chosen to skip that event the last couple of years. Obviously, this year he had the birth of his first son, so that made things a little bit different. But last year, the one signature event that he missed was at Quail Hollow. So I'm very intrigued and Scottie's preferred shot shape is left to right, but he can shape it either way. I'm not going to discount him for that reason. But Xander and Rory both like to play that draw. And uncoincidentally, those were the 2 guys down the stretch who separated themselves by a mile from the rest of the field this year. I like Akshay Bhatia. I'm expecting him to be in the 60 to 70 to 1 range by the time that tournament comes around next year. And I'd bet him down to around 110 to 1 this year, maybe 100 to 1. But I love the upside for him. And 150 to 1, I think it's a bet that will hold value through that tournament in May next year.
I love that ticket, Roberto. I brought up my model as you were talking for the 2024 Wells Fargo Championship. I was just trying to figure out where I had everybody in my sheet, and he was inside of a really strong field, let's note there, inside of the top 12 for projected win equity for me in that tournament. So at 150 to 1 price, the ball striking is going to be elite in most of these spots. He was inside the top 10 at long courses and hard courses. I talked about the ball striking in general, but just to add extra context to it, weighted total driving 12th in my model for that event, weighted proximity 6th. That's the high end marks that he gets from weighted proximity from 150 plus yards. Funny enough, you brought up Theegala, and I know Theegala hasn't necessarily found success at that venue, but Theegala was another guy who graded extremely well for me in my model. We haven't necessarily gotten the returns there, but I think that price on Batia, there's a very high likelihood chance. Like, one of the things you always want to do when you punch futures tickets, because I agree with you, it's not one, you don't want to lock up large sums of money on the favorites. Like, there's all the factors behind it, but those bets, if injuries or something happens, you're not going to get refunded in those areas. Like, those are true futures bets. So unless you're getting a value that you can run a model and say, this is a golfer that should be 50, 60, 70 to 1, whatever number that we have there, and he's 150 to 1, and I know that by the time this rolls around, there's a very small likelihood chance that I can get this price. Those are where you want to try to find your edges and your value. And I think with Batia here, we have seen it specifically this season. He is a surging golfer in his upside. He is about as high upside as you can find on the tour. And there is a realistic chance that 6 months from now, 7 months from now, we look to start 2025, or we're at the very beginning of 2025, and Akshay has worked himself into like a legitimate 40 to 1 sort of golfer in these major championships. So I think that's a great ticket that you found there, Roberto.
By the way, that is available on our sponsor, Bet365, on their app, website, however you want to find them. You can find it there. And I'm sure, but as always, be sure to shop around. Who knows if there's a better price out there? I haven't found it yet, but I've locked that in at 150 to 1. Also, very coincident. Also, with these futures bets, specifically for the majors, I like betting golfers who haven't quite reached their peak yet, or at least in their prime. And so that was the reason for Theegala at the time that I bet him. He'd never won on the PGA Tour. Now he's won with the Fortinet Championship, which I think you cashed. So congrats to you there. To wrap this up full circle, at Pinehurst, I believe, had asked Sahith Theegala, who is somebody who could win a major or multiple major championships that maybe people don't know, and he said Akshay Bhatia. So I think that's the best. I think that's the best course fit for him among any. And given his own personal preference for it this year, he also was 5th in strokes gained putting there. So that's something that I think is key as well. He played poorly as far as his ball striking, but if the greens fit his eye, that gives him some more upside. And I love that the putter has come around for him. So hopefully Akshay Bhatia can get it done for us next year in Charlotte. Spencer, you got some more matchups. Break down the rest of your card, because I've already shared all my plays.
Yeah, I will give a very open-ended answer here of players that I'm looking to back and players that I'm looking to take on. And I think that's sometimes maybe a little bit more helpful than just the straight route of this is the play. Numbers move, prices shift. It's hard when you record a show and prices have moved 30, 40 points in some of these spots. But, of golfers I was looking to take on, Carlos Ortiz was one of them, which I talked about with Abraham Answer. There's probably other routes that you can consider with Carlos Ortiz. Minwoo Lee was a name to where there are certain portions of my model that like him. There are certain portions that don't. I guess the overarching theme for him would be the market seems to be higher on him than I am. I texted you before we started the show, David Puig. That should be Puig. Just the fact that it's not Puig, fade. I don't know what we're doing there with that. That's like 2 thumbs down, Roberto. But Emiliano Grillo over him, I thought was an intriguing route. I faded Grillo last week. I talked about all the reasons why I didn't like Grillo, and I know that we continue to get this return from him that we're lacking upside. We're not necessarily putting the pieces together, and TPC Twin Cities is a built-in top 10 course for him. I mean, we see it most weeks, and while he didn't quite reach that territory, I don't believe last week, it's still been more than not high-end finishes. But The one thing I've noticed with Grillo that consistently pops in my model, which makes me wonder why it didn't last week for whatever reason, water courses, Florida courses, areas of that, Grillo gets a boost in my sheet. So I thought there were live golfers in general that may have gotten boosted in certain areas higher than they should have. Ortiz being the prime example of that, to where it's like a boom or bust commodity. I would say Puig is a very similar viewpoint of that, where the ceiling potential is going to be higher than what we're getting with Grillo, but the floor of what I'm looking at here, I expect Grillo to finish in that 15 to 25 range much more frequently. So those are some of the names that at least I was trying to back or take on. If you want to add another name there, I've already talked about Matthew Fitzpatrick. Bet365 had a wager of Fitzpatrick over Minwoo Lee at -120. I don't know where that has moved to now, Roberto. That was a play that I gave yesterday. Don't know where exactly we've gotten from those totals, but I guess the last mark there would just be the French golfers. I'm trying to figure out a way to get exposure to the French golfers, Victor Perez being one of the key examples there. I don't know if Guido Migliozzi is necessarily the prototypical number one name that I'm trying to take on. I like Guido just fine, but I also thought when that number opened, and that's is where like talking about some of these plays becomes difficult, he was in the plus range. He was plus 108. The play gets released. All of a sudden he jumps to -130, -120, -115 at all the books. And, there may not be value there, but just in general, on a lot of those names that I've discussed, there's in-tournament possibilities with them, backing or fading. There's a different ability to try to jump in on these names. Like, what I never want to do here is this to just be a straight tout show. I'll tell what I'm on. We can have the discussions, but there are so many different matchups available throughout the space and so much different ways to try to find value. I always feel like it's a better viewpoint of who are we trying to take on? Who are we trying to back? What are the names that if the right situation arises on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, where can we find value based off of those answers? And a lot of times, my model can build a board that's 100% correct. It can be Xander number one at the Open Championship. Human error comes into play. It can be Jonathan Vegas being one of the best values on my sheet last week. He hasn't won in 7-8 years. Why am I going to bet him this week? Like, there's a human element, and that's what, my numbers will spit out value, and I'm always going to take where the best value is, but we're also not backing every single player on the board. And when there's thin margins between a Colin Morikawa and a Xander at the Open Championship, and that 3 points of value that I'm getting on Morikawa pushes me 0.01% in the advantage of Morikawa, and because we can't bet everybody, there was a lot of good discussion to be had with Xander. I'm happy on the Action Network piece that I could talk about Vegas last week. I could talk about McIntyre at the Scottish. I could talk about Xander because there's true value to be found. But I think that's the one thing that value and trying to find the right names to back and fade is even more important a lot of times than the actual matchups or bets that we talk about on the show.
In the last 3 seasons on the PGA Tour, Jonathan Vegas has 2 top 10 finishes. It's a tie for second, I believe, at the 3M Open in 2022 and a win at the 3M Open this year. He's like the new Cam Davis. Just ridiculous. I also, if I have golfers, if I'm not otherwise exposed with a golfer in contention, sometimes I'll write it off as a sunk cost if all my golfers have played themselves out of the tournament. I like to bet on Sunday afternoon because you can see, all right, this is how the course is playing. The pin locations are in these spots for this round. It doesn't matter the rest of the tournament. You can figure out which kind of golfers can play well on these specific holes and what they're asking that day, because the tees move around from day to day. And then you can also see, all right, this guy is off to a strong start, or somebody else is in a spot in the lead after a birdie on this hole, and I want to fade them now. They're moving to the right or wrong part of the golf course, et cetera, et cetera. All the information that you have can help you to make a better bet in the tournament. I love to watch on the Sunday afternoons and get in the mix, and it helps me to remember the tournament more, which helps me with my broadcasting. So I like to do that sometimes for more money, sometimes for less money, depending on the edge or what's available. But that's why I like breaking it down and talking about as many golfers as possible so that we can give you guys as much information so that you can make your own bets And obviously, hopefully the data that we have found that supports our arguments or is against other golfers, you can help read the tea leaves a little bit better so that you can cash in even if we found value and don't have room on the card for whichever golfer it is.
Just as a final closing thought to that, Roberto, because I think you bring up a very good point, and it kind of goes back to the answer that I was talking about of, not every single bet for me this week, and this has been a minor change that I've made, is not to win that prototypical 7 to 8 units. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I have found with my cards recently, and I've talked about this in articles, and I'll mention it here very quickly. 2, 3, 4 years ago, I've always talked about the value being found in markets that are not the outright markets. It's these matchup markets, it's placement markets. I had about 300 plays that I put on record, whether it's on podcasts like this or articles that I had written per year. That was about the average. The last 2 years, those numbers for me had dipped, I think 140 last year matchups. And this year we're only at about 90 right now. So, I think for one, I've been a little bit too exact with the value. 2, I think books have gotten a lot savvier to where a lot of those threshold numbers that I was looking for are now gone. But what has happened specifically in the outright market is there's been an increased exposure rate percentage-wise for me in the outright market to where when I got into the space, Roberto, writing-wise at least, not the actual betting side of it, but like writing content and trying to help people with information, I was betting before a tournament started, which is going to be like one of the smallest answers that you'd ever hear anybody give in the outright market, like somewhere between a quarter of a unit to a half of a unit. That was my standard outright card. A lot of times that presented 1 or 2 names. And what I was trying to do from there is stack my cards with head-to-head matchups and then find value as the tournament went on like a Saturday night or a Sunday afternoon to where I could jump into the market and you could find real value because I didn't have a ton of exposure. What has more so happened for me, I would say, over the last 2 years is as the head-to-head matchups have gone down and now all of a sudden the outright exposure has gotten higher, it is really challenging when I have 1.1 units of exposure pre-event and we get into a Saturday night or a Sunday morning situation. Xander at the Open being the prime example, he's 3.5 to 1. In order for me to get myself into a spot where I even won a half unit, I had to go in the range of like a half of a unit in exposure. Now, all of a sudden, I'm at 1.6 units. I didn't really think it was worth it. I had a little bit of value there. I wasn't trying to compound a loss if Xander didn't win. It makes it a lot easier. And I think that's something that I just want people to keep in mind on the back of their head. We cannot bet everybody. I know that you might think you can bet everybody and you might be able to put a lot of names on a card, but it adds up at the end of the day. So one of the things that I am really stressing this week and moving forward is you're going to see a lot of my cards have less exposure, whether it's because I've taken the ROM approach or betting to win less, or just because I have less names on my card. And you're going to find me in Action Network articles on Saturday night, much more aggressive with my viewpoints. Last 4 weeks would be the prime example of that. Davis Thompson, Bobby Mack, which we did get that one in an article at 5.5 to 1. Xander at 3.5 to 1. Vegas last week, I thought Vegas was a value even at the 1.5 to 1.75 to 1 numbers you were getting. There's just no ability for me to jump on Vegas with the way that the card was built last week. So I know this is a much different discussion. This is a lot more game theory and how to build a portfolio for betting, but this is at my core. What I got into this space to do was to give advice on the optimal way to build cards rather than this is the exact bet I think you should be making. Numbers move, things happen. We're always going to tell you what we're on and what we're not on. But I think the teaching lessons are so much more valuable than the one-off plays that we can discuss. So I just wanted to mention that on this show, just because you don't hear that on very many podcasts nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. I was coming in thinking I was going to bet Scotty Scheffler, and I didn't really want to do that at 4 to 1 ish in the market. Best prices plus 420 out there at Bet365, by the way. And now I'm on Rahm and Hovland. So the amount of information that you share is always greatly appreciated, and the model is always an awesome resource to consult every single week. And I think there were some great conversations and reasons why the upside that I was looking at for Rahm and Hovland were confirmed. So I'm very excited for that. As I mentioned, always be sure to shop around, and Bet365 is one of the best places to find outright bets. And as a reminder, this podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary, and that's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. Spencer, that's all the bets I've got for this week. Anything else on your card, or where can we find your work this week?
You can find me on Twitter at TeeOffSports. I will be providing in-tournament content for Action Network. And as we've talked about quite frequently on this show, you can find my model over at Rotoballers. There's a lot of information there to dive through. You can make a copy of it, have your own personal database and model at your disposal.
Awesome. Nick's not here, but you can find him at Sticks Picks. He had Johnny Vegas last week. He was on the show, but hopefully we'll have him back next week for the final week of the regular season on the PGA Tour to win a championship. Big Webb Simpson week. He named one of his kids after the tournament because he's had so much success there. So watch out. We got a lot of propaganda incoming next week on the pod. You can find me on Twitter or X at Roberto A213. I want to give a big shout out to everybody who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, Noah Niederhofer, David Payne, and Matt Mitchell. Thanks again for tuning into our men's Olympic golf betting preview, and we'll catch you guys next week for the Wyndham Championship.